Hey y'all, so I wanted to provide you guys with a little video of a quick introduction to the Enneagram because we're going to be talking about it in Held, and it's important that you have some kind of basic information so that when we dive deeper into kind of the nuance of typing and getting you closer to knowing your pattern, that you kind of have a basic understanding already of what the Enneagram is and a little bit of how it works. So, first thing I'm going to say is that when people get introduced to the Enneagram, they always want to know, what's my type? What's my type? And I'm going to include some tips for finding your type, and I'm going to help you with that process as much as I possibly can. But just know that it takes some people years to land in their correct type, and that there's benefits for mistyping yourself and kind of sitting in the energy of certain types because each type has something to teach us. So before we go into that, before we jump into you learning about your type, let's talk about what is the Enneagram. So the Enneagram is this figure right here. You've probably seen it before, or you might have seen the circle with the triangle. That's a really common symbol. You can see it everywhere from Alcoholics Anonymous to Harry Potter. And that's because that symbol is ancient, like prehistoric ancient. They found this figure in prehistoric caves on every continent except Antarctica. So we know that the symbol is really ancient and old, but using the Enneagram for personality purposes is more recent, like as of the late 50s, early 60s. And it kind of came to the Western world via a Russian philosopher. And I won't tell you too much about him. You can kind of learn more about him on your own. But basically, this figure is representative of 9 different personality types. So we've got the 9 here at the top, and that's at the top for a good reason. Every number on here is in its placement for a reason, and you'll see that each number has a line connected, 2 lines connected to it. So you'll see like type 7 is connected to type 5 and type 1, and those lines also represent something. And each of these types is a distinct type. So I'll just go ahead and tell you the names of each type. So type 9 is called the peacemaker or the mediator. Type 1 is called the reformer or the perfectionist. Type 2 is called the helper. Type 3 or the giver, sometimes the giver, the helper, the giver, the special friend. Type 3 is called the achiever, also called the chameleon. Type 4 is called the tragic romantic or the individualist. It's sometimes called the artist. Type 5 is called the investigator or the observer. 6 is the skeptic or the devil's advocate, also called the loyalist. 7 is called the enthusiast or the epicure. And 8 is called the challenger or the boss. So even in just those names, you might already be like, ooh me, or you might be like, oh, I'm all of those, right? And the truth is that just like attachment, we have all of these inside of us, but one of them kind of feels like home. One of them is the place where we exist most often, and we can kind of see that pattern come up most often in our life, okay? So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the structure of the model, and then I'll do some separate videos about each type so you can kind of know the basics, okay? So first thing you'll notice is that each of these are in a very specific place, okay? So we have 3 distinct triads. 9 divided by 3 is 3, right? So each triad represents a different emotion. And the emotion is a big part of the type structure and how the type interacts with the world. So we always start at the top with 9, which I know sounds kind of funny because it's like, why would you start with the last number? But we start with type 9 because type 9 I call type 9 the rainbow of the Enneagram because type 9 really embodies all of the types inside of it more than the other ones. Type 9s are pretty hard to type because they can look like a lot of other types, but type 9 sits at the top because it integrates all of them the most. Type 9 and type 1 and type 8 are all three connected by what's called the gut triad. That means that type 9, type 8, and type 1 all operate primarily from their instincts are in their gut. They just know stuff in their gut. So all three of them um, kind of operate in this instinctual way, in a way. And the core emotion that goes with 8, 9, and 1 is anger. So each of these have different relationships to anger. And we'll talk a little bit more about their distinct relationships later. The next triad that's really important is 2, 3, and 4. And 2, 3, and 4 are part of what's called the heart or the image or the emotion triad. And 2, 3, and 4 really focus their energy and have a special relationship with their heart. They really tap in here. You might even notice 2s, 3s, and 4s touching their heart or really kind of tapping into their feelings whenever they make big decisions, but they kind of just operate from a more heart-filled space. And the core emotion for the heart triad is shame or sadness. And then 6, 5, 6, and 7 is the head triad. So this is our intellect triad. So 5, 6, and 7 are really operating from the mind. And you can tell that when you interact with them because you can tell that with 5, 6, and 7s, there's a lot of thinking going on. There's a lot of like, what if this and what if that? And, imagining possibilities and just like really, you can kind of see the wheels turning in there. So those are the triads. Those are important to name. The other thing that I think is really good for basics is wings. So you have your core type, okay? But then you have two numbers next to it. And these numbers are called wings, okay? And wings are kind of like if you were making a marinara sauce, your type is the tomatoes, but these are kind of like flavors, okay? So like basil or balsamic vinegar, right? And they kind of inform the type, but you never become your wing. It just kind of shows up occasionally. And that'll make more sense when I talk about each of the types and kind of how they happen. So I'm a type 2 and I have a very strong 3 wing. Okay? That's probably why I'm here. Working hard, right? Okay. So that's wings. The other thing that's really important to name while we're looking at this is that each of these types, they have these lines, and these lines represent movement, okay? And when our type moves, it doesn't become the other type, but it kind of takes on qualities of the other type. So I'm a 2 and I go to 8 and 4, okay? Now, for our purposes, we'll say that one of these is a stress point and the other one's a relax point. So I go to 8 when I'm meeting new people, when my life is kind of chaotic or I'm feeling overwhelmed, then you might see me a little bit more in 8. That means that I kind of take on a bigger energy and I might make more jokes or my voice might be louder. And if you see me when I'm really relaxed, I can look a lot like a 4, where I'm kind of, I might talk slower. I'm just like a little bit more in tune with my emotion and I'm just kind of slower in general. You might even notice differences in the way that I'm talking about these things as I'm talking about them, right? That's really important. So, on that note, let's talk a little bit about embodiment. So, I'm taught in a tradition of the Enneagram called the embodiment tradition. And basically, the difference between the embodiment tradition and like maybe a lot of the stuff you see online, which is narrative tradition based, is that the embodiment tradition is actually, we kind of ascribe to the idea that the type influences the way that we hold our bodies. So, every type, when I talk about them, you're going to notice things about my body, and I'll even kind of give you a demonstration of the embodiment of the type when I'm doing it. So, because I'm a type 2, you might notice that I'm kind of smiley and I have, kind of intense eye contact, and I'm a little bit bubbly and like, a little bit fast, like kind of like a bird. And that's part of the embodiment of my type. My type is very warm and friendly, and relationships are very important to type 2s. So, all of these qualities kind of live in my body. Type 2s also tend to be like weirdly small in their bodies, and I'm 4'11". So, there it is, your classic too. Okay. Um, Last couple things about the structure. So it's important to name that while there are 9 basic types, each type has 3 of what's called a subtype. And the subtypes, I'm not going to go into in our introductory video, but please just know that they're very important when we are typing because they can really flavor the types differently. The subtypes are based on biological drives. They're based on kind of 3 biological drives that all humans have, and that biological drive informs the type depending on the type's structure. So the 3 drives are social, that's the drive to form groups or be part of a group or notice groups, right? Sexual, which doesn't always mean sex, but it does mean just like we call it sexual, intimate, or one-to-one subtype, and that just means that we relate. We like to be one-on-one with people, or we have a certain proclivity for noticing or getting preoccupied with romantic relationships, or we may give our partner kind of special attention compared to some of our other relationships, depending on the type. And then the third instinct is called self-preservation. And that one means, right, preserving the self, making sure that I'm comfortable, that I have water, that I have food, that I know where the exits are, right? So each of these things informs the type pretty specifically. So it's good to know that. I'm not going to go into the subtypes of each type in this video, but it may be a discussion that comes up when we're kind of getting more into typing and figuring things out. I'm also going to be offering a la carte typing coaching sessions for folks who are in held at a pretty deeply discounted price while held is going on. So just know that if you want to get on my calendar, that's something that's available to you for being in this group. Okay. All right. Last thing these are some questions that I want you to consider while you are going through this video and while you are thinking about your type. Okay. Pay attention to any description that I give that feels kind of cringy or uncomfortable, because sometimes when we're listening to the type and we start to feel a little pang of like, oh, I didn't know people saw that, or I don't want people to see that. See, that's like me. I'm image triad, right? Image triad. Then it can kind of lead us in the direction. Also, pay attention to any type that you're like, ooh, I really like that type. Because that could be your health point. It could be the type that you wish that you were. I wish I was a type 7 forever, right? Um, it also could be a type that maybe you over identify with. And I think it's really important to consider, what does resonance feel like in your body? How do you know when something is true for you? That just is some things to consider as you're going through.